Hello my dear students, in this lecture we are going to understand bypass factor and contact factor. Before understanding bypass factor and contact factor, let us understand what is meaning of bypass and what is meaning of contact. Now let us understand for heating coil first. Let us say the first is for heating coil. What will be the bypass and what will be the contact, right? Now let us say you have one container and open container, and in this container let us say there is a heating coil. This coil is heating coil. This coil will be having some temperature of coil, right? And on this left side let us say there is a cold air, right? Here there is a cold air which is flowing over this coil. This cold air is flowing over this coil, and let us say at inlet the temperature of air is T1, right? Now whenever this air is passing over the coil, right, then this air will get heated and this air will come out with other temperature. Therefore this side there will be a hot air at other temperature, let us say T2, right? Means this coil is used for heating the cold air, right? Now whenever this cold air is flowing over the coil, certain molecules of this air will come into contact with this coil, and these molecules will get temperature is equal to temperature of coil, and remaining molecules which are flowing around this coil will get heat from this coil by convection and radiation. And my dear students, convection and radiations are the phenomena of heat transfer, and whenever there is a heat transfer there is always resistance, right? There is always resistance for heat transfer, either it may be a conduction or convection or radiation. In heat transfer subject you will understand this concept that while heat transfer there is always a resistance, and because of this resistance in radiation and convection for other molecules, the temperature of these molecules will be less than temperature of coil. So overall temperature of this air coming out will be having lesser temperature as compared to temperature of coil. That means this coil temperature is maximum here. Coil temperature is maximum. Then whenever air is passing over the coil, the temperature of air will increase and becomes T2. But this T2 is less than temperature of coil, because here there is a heat transfer, and in heat transfer the mode of heat transfer is convection and radiation, and because of convective resistance and radiation resistance, the temperature coming out from the coil is having lesser temperature than temperature of coil, and the cold temperature is minimum temperature, that is T1 is minimum. Therefore this is the relation between temperatures, that is temperature of coil is more than T2 is more than T1. Let us draw this sensible heating process on psychrometric chart. Let us say the psychrometric chart will be like this. Now on psychrometric chart the initial condition is T1, temperature T1. Now we are using the coil for heating purpose, right? And we have reached up to temperature T2. The air coming out will be having temperature T2, but the temperature of coil is more than T2. The temperature of coil is more than T2, right? Therefore here you can see here T2 to T coil, this much factor is bypassed. Therefore this is called bypass. Now here this portion is called bypass, right? Bypass, because the coil used for heating is having temperature of coil which is more than the air coming out. Therefore this is called bypass, and the air temperature is increased from T1 to T2. Therefore this up to this it is called contact, right? Up to this T1 to T2 this is called contact, right? Now my dear students, here we have concept of bypass factor and contact factor, right? Let us understand first bypass factor. Bypass factor, it is also represented by BPF, bypass factor. This bypass factor is nothing but the bypass difference of temperature is, bypass temperature difference is temperature of coil minus T2 divided by total temperature difference, that is maximum temperature difference, temperature of coil minus T1, right? The bypass is nothing but difference of bypass, that is temperature of coil minus T2 divided by total temperature difference, that is maximum temperature difference, temperature of coil minus T1, right? This is called bypass factor. And again there is a concept of contact factor. second is contact factor. Now my dear students, contact factor is nothing but it is also represented by CF, and this contact factor is nothing but here the contact difference divided by maximum temperature difference. Here contact difference is T2 minus T1, therefore it is T2 minus T1 divided by maximum temperature difference is temperature of coil minus T1, that is total temperature difference, right? And my dear students, if I add them, that is bypass factor plus contact factor, it will be always equal to 1. Bypass factor plus contact factor is always equal to 1. Let us add them. Bypass factor is temperature of coil minus T2 divided by total temperature difference, that is temperature of coil minus T1, plus contact factor is T2 minus T1 divided by temperature of coil minus T1. Now here in this case the denominator is same, right? In this case the denominator is same, so take a common denominator, therefore you will find is equal to 1, this is equal to 1, therefore let us take common denominator, temperature of coil minus T1, and in numerator temperature of coil minus T2 plus T2 minus T1. Now here this T2 will get cancelled in numerator, minus T2 plus T2 will get cancelled, therefore we will get is equal to 1, that is temperature of coil minus T1 divided by temperature of coil minus T1, therefore is equal to 1. Therefore summation of bypass factor and contact factor is always equal to 1. Now here we have understood this bypass factor and contact factor for heating coil. Let us understand for cooling coil. The coil can be a cooling coil also, right? So second, for cooling coil, right? Now let us say again the air is flowing. Now here we have to cool the air, therefore here there will be a coil used for cooling of the air. The coil will be having temperature of coil, therefore if I want to cool the air, this side there will be a hot air at temperature T1, and this hot air is flowing over the coil, right? And whenever this hot air is flowing over the coil, because of the coil temperature is less than hot air, therefore the air will get cooled and cold air will come out at temperature T2. Now similar to previous case, whenever hot air is flowing over the coil, this coil is having lesser temperature than hot coil, therefore this hot air will lose heat to the coil, and this hot air will try to come into equilibrium with this temperature of coil. That means this hot air will try to achieve temperature of coil, but because of resistance in radiation and convection heat transfer, this hot air will not come up to the temperature of coil, right? And this hot air will come as a cold air at different temperature. Therefore here we can say the T1 will be more than T2 is more than temperature of coil. In this case temperature of coil will be minimum, right? So if I draw psychrometric chart for this case, the psychrometric chart will be like this. It is a cooling coil, means sensible cooling, and for sensible cooling initially the temperature of air is T1 and temperature is decreasing, now temperature will reach up to T2, right? Up to T2, temperature T2, but temperature of coil is less than T2 also, right? This is the temperature of coil. So my dear students, in this case here bypass is, this is bypass now, because we have reached up to T2, but our target was to reach up to temperature of coil, therefore this is bypass, right? And here actually the temperature of coil air initially was T1 and we have reached up to T2, therefore this is contact, So similar to previous case, in this case bypass factor will be equal to this difference at bypass divided by total difference, that is we can say T2 minus temperature of coil divided by total temperature difference is T1 minus temperature of coil, and contact factor is equal to the contact difference, that is T1 minus T2 divided by total temperature difference, that is T1 minus temperature of coil, that is maximum temperature difference. And again we can prove here bypass factor plus contact factor is always equal to 1. Thank you dear students. In next lecture we will see total heat load.